My husband looked me straight in the eye and said I was too old to compete in today's corporate world. He actually laughed when I mentioned applying for marketing positions, telling me companies wanted fresh energy, not someone trying to catch up after being away for 15 years. Last month, I walked into his office as his new department head at DataCore Solutions. The same man who told me I'd never get hired now reports directly to me. And let me tell you, that first team meeting was something I'll never forget. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Lisa Chen, and at 52 years old, I thought, my biggest accomplishment was raising 2 incredible kids and keeping a marriage together for 25 years. I live in Denver, Colorado, in one of those suburban neighborhoods where everyone knows each other's business, and the biggest drama usually involves whose sprinkler system is watering the sidewalk. For the past 15 years, my world revolved around soccer practices, PTA meetings, school fundraisers, and making sure dinner was on the table when my husband Mark came home from his job at DataCore Solutions, a mid-sized tech consulting firm downtown. Mark had always been the breadwinner, the one with the impressive business cards and the stories about difficult clients and office politics. He's a senior analyst there, specializing in data systems integration, and he takes pride in being one of the go-to guys when companies need their technology infrastructure overhauled. He makes good money, enough for us to live comfortably in our 4-bedroom house with the 2-car garage and the backyard that backs up to the greenbelt. For years, this arrangement worked perfectly. I managed our home life with the efficiency of a military operation, and Mark handled our financial security with steady reliability. But here's what Mark never knew, what I had stopped talking about years ago because it seemed irrelevant to our daily life. Before I became a full-time mother, I wasn't just working in marketing. I was damn good at it. I have an MBA from Northwestern University, and I spent 7 years at major advertising agencies in Chicago before we moved to Denver. I managed campaigns for national brands, led creative teams, and once orchestrated a product launch that increased market share by 18% in 6 months. I was the person clients specifically requested when their previous campaigns had failed, because I had a reputation for understanding both the data and the human psychology behind purchasing decisions. When our daughter Amy was born, followed by our son Jake 2 years later, I made the conscious choice to step away from that world. It wasn't because I had to, but because I wanted to be present for every milestone, every bedtime story, every scraped knee that needed kissing better. Mark and I agreed that one of us should be home during those crucial early years, and since his career was already established and climbing steadily, it made financial sense for me to be the one to pause my professional trajectory. The years flew by in a blur of birthday parties, family vacations, homework supervision, and the 1,000 small moments that make up a childhood. I threw myself into being the best mother I could be, volunteering at school events, organizing neighborhood block parties, and managing our household with the same strategic thinking I had once applied to marketing campaigns. I found fulfillment in creating a stable, nurturing environment for our family, and Mark appreciated coming home to a house where everything ran smoothly and he could focus on advancing his career without worrying about domestic logistics. But children grow up, and as Amy and Jake became more independent, I started feeling a familiar itch. It began subtly, with moments of restlessness during quiet afternoons when both kids were at school and the house felt too still. I found myself reading business articles online, following marketing industry news, and wondering what had changed in the professional world during my absence. When Amy left for college last fall and Jake started his senior year of high school, the empty nest syndrome hit me harder than I had anticipated. The house that had once buzzed with activity now felt cavernous. I could clean everything by noon and still have 6 hours before Mark came home. I started taking longer walks, reorganizing closets that were already organized, and finding myself strangely envious when I heard other women talking about their jobs and professional challenges. I realized that while I had been pouring all my energy into being a wife and mother, I had been slowly losing touch with the ambitious, driven woman I used to be. One evening, as Mark told me about a particularly challenging project at work involving a client whose marketing strategy was completely outdated, I found myself analyzing the situation and offering suggestions. I pointed out that their approach was missing several key demographic insights and suggested alternative messaging strategies that might resonate better with their target audience. Mark listened politely, but then changed the subject to Jake's upcoming baseball game, and I realized he saw my input as casual conversation rather than professional insight. That's when I started seriously considering returning to work. I began researching what had changed in the marketing industry during my 15-year absence. Digital marketing had exploded. Social media platforms had become essential business. Tools and data analytics had become more sophisticated than ever. Instead of feeling overwhelmed by these changes, I felt energized. This was a puzzle to solve, new skills to master, an intellectual challenge that made me feel more alive than I had in years. I started updating my LinkedIn profile, reaching out to former colleagues who were still in the industry, and researching companies in the Denver area that might need someone with my background. The more I learned about current marketing trends, the more confident I became that my foundational knowledge was still valuable, even if it needed updating with contemporary tools and platforms. Mark seemed supportive during our dinner conversations about my career exploration. He would ask how my job search was going and offer encouraging comments about taking my time to find the right opportunity. He even suggested I network at some of the business events he attended through DataCore Solutions. I appreciated what I thought was his encouragement and felt grateful to have a husband who supported my desire to re-enter the workforce. Looking back, I can see that I was naive about his true feelings. I interpreted his gentle suggestions to take my time as patience and understanding when they were actually subtle attempts to discourage me from moving too quickly or ambitiously. When I mentioned applying to several marketing positions, including one at DataCore Solutions itself, I thought his surprised expression was just shock at the coincidence of us potentially working at the same company. The position at DataCore was for a marketing coordinator role, which was actually a step down from where I had been in my career 15 years earlier. But I figured it would be a good way to get back into the professional world and prove myself again. The job description mentioned responsibilities that I had handled easily in my previous career, and I felt confident that my experience, even if not recent, would be relevant to their needs. Mark's reaction when I told him about the DataCore application was my first real clue that something was wrong. His face went through several expressions very quickly, starting with surprise, moving through what looked like concern, and settling on something that resembled condescending amusement. He sat back in his chair and gave me a look that I had never seen before, like he was trying to figure out how to explain something obvious to someone who wasn't quite getting it. He started talking about how much the business world had changed, how companies were looking for people who understood social media intuitively, who had grown up with technology, who could think at the speed of digital innovation. He used phrases like digital natives and contemporary skill sets, and suggested that maybe I should consider starting smaller, perhaps with part-time work or volunteer positions that would help me ease back into professional life gradually. At the time, I thought he was being protective, trying to shield me from potential disappointment by managing my expectations. I even felt touched that he cared enough about my feelings to want to prepare me for the possibility that the job market might be more challenging than I anticipated. I thanked him for his honesty and told him I appreciated his concern for my well-being. But something about that conversation stayed with me, a nagging feeling that there had been something in his tone, something in the way he had looked at me that didn't quite match the supportive words he was saying. It was the same feeling I used to get during client presentations when someone would nod and smile while I was speaking, but I could sense they had already made up their mind against my proposal. A few weeks later, DataCore Solutions was hosting their annual company barbecue, a casual summer event where employees could bring their families for an afternoon of food, games, and informal networking. Mark had been attending these events for years, and I had always enjoyed meeting his colleagues and their spouses. It was one of the few times I got a glimpse into his professional world, and I liked seeing him in his element, comfortable and respected among his peers. This year felt different because I was no longer just Mark's wife attending a company social event. I was someone actively looking for work, someone who had actually applied for a position at this very company. I found myself paying more attention to the conversations around me, listening for insights about company culture, management style, and growth opportunities. I was thinking like a potential employee rather than just a supportive spouse. The weather was perfect that day, warm but not too hot, with a light breeze that kept the outdoor setting comfortable. The company had rented a pavilion at one of Denver's nicest parks, and there were picnic tables scattered around, a volleyball net set up on the grass, and a grill station where several employees were taking turns cooking burgers and hot dogs. Children ran around playing tag while adults stood in small groups, beer bottles and soda cans in hand, talking and laughing in the relaxed atmosphere. I was helping myself to potato salad from the buffet table when I heard Mark's voice carrying from a nearby group of his colleagues. He was telling a story, and I could hear the familiar cadence he used when he was entertaining people with what he considered an amusing anecdote. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I wasn't intentionally eavesdropping, but his voice was distinctive enough that I automatically tuned in, the way you do when you hear your spouse talking in another room. What I heard made my blood run cold. Mark was saying, with obvious amusement, in his voice, that his wife thought she could just waltz back into corporate marketing after being a soccer mom for 15 years. He was telling his colleagues that I had some unrealistic ideas about jumping back into a career after such a long absence, and that he didn't have the heart to tell me how unlikely it was that any serious company would hire someone so far removed from the current business environment. The men around him were laughing and nodding in agreement, making comments about their own wives and the amusing things women sometimes convinced themselves they could do. One of them mentioned that his wife had similar delusions about starting a catering business, and another joked about the midlife crisis phase that seemed to hit women when their kids left home. They were talking about us like we were children playing dress-up, like our professional ambitions were cute, but ultimately insignificant fantasies. I stood there holding my plate of potato salad, feeling like I had been punched in the stomach. This was my husband, the man I had supported through every career milestone, the person I trusted most in the world, and he was publicly mocking my desire to return to work. He wasn't just expressing private doubts or concerns. He was entertaining his colleagues with stories about my unrealistic expectations and naive understanding of the business world. What made it worse was the realization that this wasn't a spontaneous comment born out of momentary frustration or poor judgment. Mark was comfortable talking about me this way, relaxed and confident in his assessment of my capabilities. This was clearly how he really felt about my career aspirations, and he had been hiding those feelings behind supportive words and encouraging smiles during our conversations at home. I managed to walk away from that conversation without confronting him immediately, but I spent the rest of the barbecue in a fog of hurt and anger. I smiled and made small talk with the other spouses, played with the children who wanted attention, and helped clean up afterward, all while processing the devastating realization that my husband didn't believe in me at all. He had been humoring me, patronizing me, treating my professional goals like a harmless hobby that he could indulge without taking seriously. The drive home was quiet, with Mark commenting on what a nice event it had been and how much he enjoyed these opportunities to relax with his work friends. I made appropriate responses, but my mind was racing, replaying every conversation we had had about my job search and reinterpreting his comments through this new lens of understanding. All those gentle suggestions to take my time, all that talk about managing expectations and being realistic, All those recommendations to start small and work my way up gradually, they hadn't been supportive guidance. They had been subtle attempts to discourage me from pursuing anything too ambitious or threatening to his position as our family's primary breadwinner. That night, lying in bed next to my husband of 25 years, I felt more alone than I had since the early days of our marriage, when we were still learning how to navigate disagreements and disappointments together. But this felt different from those early relationship challenges. This felt like a fundamental betrayal of trust, a revelation that the person I thought knew me best had such a limited and condescending view of my capabilities that he could casually mock them to virtual strangers. I realized that Mark's identity was deeply tied to being the successful one in our marriage, the one with the impressive career and the professional recognition. My return to work wasn't just a personal goal for me, it was a threat to the dynamic that had defined our relationship for the past 15 years. He had grown comfortable with being the expert, the one with stories to tell about office politics and client challenges, while I provided the domestic stability that allowed him to focus entirely on his career advancement. The thought of me succeeding professionally, potentially even outshining him or earning more than he did, was clearly something he couldn't imagine or accept. Instead of seeing my career aspirations as an opportunity for our family to have even greater financial security and for me to find personal fulfillment, he saw them as a disruption to the established order of our marriage. As I lay there in the dark, listening to Mark sleep peacefully beside me, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to prove him wrong, not just for my own satisfaction, but because I suddenly understood that my marriage would never be truly equal or respectful until I demonstrated that I was more than just a supportive wife and devoted mother. I was a capable, intelligent, ambitious woman who had temporarily set aside her career goals, not because she was incapable of achieving them, but because she had chosen to prioritize her family during a specific phase of life. The next morning, I began plotting my comeback with the same strategic thinking I had once applied to marketing campaigns. I would show Mark and everyone else exactly what Lisa Chen was capable of accomplishing, and I would do it in a way that left no room for doubt or dismissal. My husband thought he knew who I was, but he was about to discover that he had seriously underestimated the woman he had married. The rejection emails started arriving within 2 weeks of my revelation at the company barbecue. Each one felt like a small knife twist, not because I couldn't handle professional disappointment, but because "we've decided to move forward with other candidates" seemed to confirm what Mark had said about my unrealistic expectations. The language was always polite and encouraging, thanking me for my interest and suggesting I apply for future opportunities, but the message underneath was crystal clear. 15 years away from the workforce had made me unemployable in their eyes. The first rejection came from a small marketing agency in downtown Denver that specialized in healthcare clients. I had been excited about this one because my pre-children experience included pharmaceutical marketing, and I thought the overlap would work in my favor. The hiring manager had seemed engaged during our phone screening, asking thoughtful questions about my previous campaigns and nodding appreciatively when I described how I had managed a product launch for a medical device company back in Chicago. But apparently, engagement during the interview process didn't translate into serious consideration for the position. When I mentioned this rejection to Mark over dinner, expecting at least some sympathy or encouragement, his response was a masterclass in passive aggression disguised as concern. He reached across the table and patted my hand with exaggerated gentleness, his voice taking on that same condescending tone I had heard at the barbecue. He told me that rejection was normal in any job search, especially for someone in my situation, and that I shouldn't take it personally. The phrase "someone in my situation" hung in the air between us like a judgment, and I realized he meant someone who was older, out of practice, and fundamentally less desirable than the younger candidates I was competing against. The second rejection came from a mid-size company that developed software for restaurants. This one stung more because I had made it through 2 rounds of interviews and felt genuinely hopeful about my chances. The hiring manager had specifically mentioned that they valued experience and were looking for someone who could bring a mature perspective to their marketing efforts. During my final interview, I had presented a comprehensive analysis of their current marketing strategy, identifying several areas where they could improve their customer acquisition and retention. The feedback had been positive, with multiple team members commenting on insights they hadn't considered before, but ultimately, they chose someone else. And when I asked for feedback, the hiring manager gave me a diplomatically worded explanation about finding a candidate whose skills were more aligned with their current digital marketing needs. The subtext was obvious. They wanted someone who had grown up with social media platforms and could navigate the constantly changing landscape of online marketing without needing to catch up on 15 years of technological evolution. Mark's reaction to this second rejection was even more insufferable than his response to the first. He suggested that maybe I was aiming too high, that I should consider entry-level positions where I could rebuild my skills gradually instead of applying for roles that required extensive experience with contemporary marketing tools. He used the word realistic several times during this conversation, always in the context of adjusting my expectations downward, and I could see the satisfaction in his eyes as he positioned himself as the voice of practical wisdom guiding his naive wife toward a more sensible approach. The third rejection was from a nonprofit organization that focused on environmental conservation. I had been particularly excited about this opportunity because it combined marketing work with a cause I cared deeply about, and the salary, while lower than what I had earned in my previous career, would have been enough to give me financial independence and professional fulfillment. The interview process had been extensive, including a presentation where I outlined a fundraising campaign strategy that could potentially double their donor engagement within 18 months. The executive director had been enthusiastic about my ideas and had even mentioned that they rarely saw such comprehensive strategic thinking from candidates. But 3 days later, I received an email explaining that they had decided to hire someone with more recent experience in digital fundraising platforms and social media campaign management. Once again, my foundational marketing knowledge was acknowledged but deemed insufficient without the contemporary technical skills that had emerged during my absence from the workforce. By the time the fourth and fifth rejections arrived, I was beginning to question everything I thought I knew about my own capabilities. These weren't form letters from companies that had never seriously considered my application. These were thoughtful rejections from organizations where I had progressed through multiple interview rounds, where hiring managers had complimented my strategic thinking and industry knowledge, but where my 15-year gap in employment ultimately disqualified me from serious consideration. Mark's response to my growing collection of rejections evolved from condescending sympathy to barely concealed triumph. He would ask about my job search with the tone of someone inquiring about a sick relative, full of concern, but also resignation, about an inevitable negative outcome. When I described the feedback I was receiving about my skills being outdated or my experience being too far in the past, he would nod knowingly and suggest that this was exactly what he had been trying to prepare me for from the beginning. One evening, after I had received 2 rejections in a single day, Mark suggested we have a serious conversation about my career goals. He poured himself a glass of wine and settled into his favorite armchair with the air of someone preparing to deliver difficult but necessary truth. He told me that he had been thinking about my situation and that maybe it was time to consider alternative approaches to finding fulfillment outside of traditional employment. He suggested that I might find satisfaction in volunteer work, where my skills could be valuable without the pressure of competing against younger candidates in the corporate job market. He mentioned several nonprofit organizations where wives of his colleagues had found meaningful ways to contribute their time and energy. He talked about the flexibility of volunteer work, how it would allow me to pursue interests without the stress of deadlines and performance evaluations that came with paid employment. Throughout this conversation, Mark maintained the tone of someone offering helpful guidance, but I could hear the underlying message clearly. He was suggesting that I give up on my professional ambitions and accept a role that would keep me busy without threatening his position as our family's primary breadwinner. Volunteer work would allow him to tell people that his wife was doing meaningful work without having to acknowledge that she was capable of competing successfully in the business world. The conversation that finally opened my eyes to the full extent of Mark's sabotage happened 3 weeks later, during what should have been a celebration of our wedding anniversary. We had dinner reservations at one of Denver's nicest restaurants, the kind of place where Mark liked to take clients when he needed to impress them with DataCore Solutions' success and stability. I had bought a new dress for the occasion, something sophisticated and professional-looking that made me feel confident and attractive. During the appetizer course, Mark raised his glass of champagne and proposed a toast that I will never forget as long as I live. He said he wanted to toast his beautiful wife, who was finally coming to understand that being an amazing mother and supportive partner was more valuable than any corporate title she might pursue. He said he was proud of me for recognizing my true priorities and for realizing that some dreams were meant to be set aside in favor of more important responsibilities. The words hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't a husband celebrating our marriage or acknowledging my worth as a person. This was a man who was actively celebrating what he saw as my failure, my surrender, my acceptance of a diminished role in our relationship and in the world. He was toasting my defeat as if it were a victory, and he expected me to smile and clink glasses with him in acknowledgement of my own inadequacy. I managed to get through the rest of the dinner without causing a scene, but that night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling and processing the full scope of what I was dealing with. Mark wasn't just unsupportive of my career goals, he was actively invested in my failure. My success would threaten the identity he had built around being the accomplished spouse in our marriage, and he preferred to see me struggle and doubt myself rather than risk having to adjust his own self-concept. The next morning, I made a decision that would change the trajectory of everything that followed. I was going to stop sharing information about my job search with Mark. Instead of seeking his advice or looking for his emotional support, I was going to treat him like any other skeptical observer whose opinion was irrelevant to my ultimate success. If he wanted to bet against me, that was his choice. But I wasn't going to give him any more opportunities to undermine my confidence or influence my strategy. I started my computer that morning and began researching a completely different approach to my job search. Instead of continuing to apply for traditional marketing positions where my employment gap would be seen as a liability, I decided to focus on building recent, demonstrable experience that would prove my current capabilities. I enrolled in 3 online certification programs: Google Analytics, Facebook Marketing, and HubSpot Content Marketing. These weren't just feel-good continuing education courses. They were rigorous training programs that would give me official credentials in the digital marketing tools that had emerged during my absence from the workforce. While I was working through these certification programs, I also started volunteering for a local women's shelter, not because Mark had suggested volunteer work as an alternative to employment, but because I wanted to use my marketing skills to help an organization I cared about. The shelter's fundraising efforts were poorly organized, and their community outreach was virtually non-existent. I offered to create a comprehensive marketing plan that would increase their visibility and donor engagement. The executive director, a woman named Patricia who had been running the shelter for 12 years, was initially skeptical about accepting help from someone she perceived as a wealthy suburban housewife looking for a meaningful way to spend her free time. But when I presented my analysis of their current marketing efforts and outlined specific strategies for improvement, her attitude changed completely. She realized that I wasn't offering to stuff envelopes or organize charity drives. I was offering professional-level expertise that could genuinely transform their ability to serve women in crisis. Working with the shelter gave me something I had been missing during my job search, an opportunity to apply my skills in a real-world setting and see immediate results from my efforts. Within 6 weeks of implementing my marketing plan, their website traffic had increased by 40%, and they had received inquiries from 3 potential major donors who had never heard of the organization before. Patricia was so impressed with these results that she asked if I would consider taking on additional projects. and she began introducing me to other nonprofit leaders who were struggling with similar marketing challenges. This volunteer work was giving me exactly what I needed to rebuild my professional confidence and demonstrate my current capabilities, but it was also creating an unexpected source of tension with Mark. When I told him about the success I was having with the shelter's marketing efforts, his response was dismissive and slightly irritated. He suggested that nonprofit work was completely different from corporate marketing, implying that my volunteer successes didn't translate into qualifications for paid employment in the business world. But what really seemed to bother Mark was the amount of time and energy I was investing in these projects. He had expected volunteer work to be a casual, part-time activity that would keep me occupied without interfering with my availability to manage our household and support his career. Instead, I was treating these volunteer opportunities with the same level of professionalism and commitment that I had once brought to paid positions, and my success was earning me recognition and respect in Denver's nonprofit community. The breakthrough moment came when Patricia introduced me to the founder of a startup company that had developed an app to help women find safe housing resources. The founder, a woman named Jessica, who had survived domestic violence herself, had created an innovative product, but was struggling to reach her target audience. Her marketing efforts were scattered and ineffective, and she was burning through her limited startup funding without gaining the user adoption she needed to attract investors. Jessica had heard about my work with the shelter and asked if I would be willing to consult on her marketing strategy. This wasn't volunteer work. She was offering to pay me for professional marketing services, and she was specifically seeking me out because of my demonstrated expertise rather than settling for my help as a cost-effective alternative to hiring an established marketing firm. I accepted Jessica's offer and threw myself into developing a comprehensive marketing strategy for her app. This project allowed me to combine everything I had learned through my certification programs with the strategic thinking skills I had developed during my previous career. I created user personas, developed messaging frameworks, designed a content marketing strategy, and implemented social media campaigns that were specifically targeted to reach women who might need safe housing resources. The results exceeded everyone's expectations, including my own. Within 3 months, Jessica's app downloads had increased by over 200%, and she had gained enough user traction to attract interest from several potential investors. More importantly, for my own career goals, I had created a recent, documentable success story that proved my ability to deliver professional-level results using contemporary marketing tools and strategies. Jessica was so pleased with my work that she offered me a permanent position as her head of marketing, with a salary that was actually higher than what I had been earning 15 years earlier when I left the workforce. She also offered me equity in the company, recognizing that my marketing expertise was essential to the app's long-term success. For the first time since I had started my job search, I was being valued for my capabilities rather than penalized for my employment gap. When I told Mark about Jessica's job offer, his reaction was a mixture of shock, skepticism, and barely concealed resentment. He questioned whether a startup could offer the kind of job security and benefits that I would need, suggesting that I was being naive about the risks of working for an unestablished company. He pointed out that most startups fail within their first few years, and that I would be better off continuing to look for positions with more established organizations. But underneath his practical concerns, I could see something else entirely. Mark was realizing that my professional comeback was not only possible, it was actually happening. The woman he had dismissed as unrealistic and out of touch was about to accept a senior marketing position with a growing company, and he was struggling to process this information in a way that didn't require him to acknowledge how wrong he had been about my capabilities. I told Mark that I was going to accept Jessica's offer, and that I was excited about the opportunity to be part of building something meaningful while reestablishing my professional credentials. His response was to suggest that we needed to have a long conversation about how this decision would affect our family, our marriage, and our established way of dividing responsibilities. That conversation, which happened the following weekend, revealed the full extent of Mark's resistance to my professional success. He was worried about how my new job would impact his own career, suggesting that he might need to turn down travel opportunities or client meetings if I wasn't available to manage things at home. He was concerned about the impression it would make on his colleagues if his wife was working for a startup that focused on helping domestic violence survivors, as if my association with such work would somehow reflect poorly on his professional reputation. Most revealing of all, Mark was clearly threatened by the possibility that I might be successful in this new role. He asked pointed questions about my salary and equity stake, and I could see him calculating whether my compensation might eventually exceed his own. The idea that his wife might out-earn him or achieve professional recognition that surpassed his own was clearly something he had never seriously considered and wasn't prepared to handle gracefully. But by this point, I had moved beyond caring about Mark's comfort level with my career decisions. His lack of support had been painful, but it had also been clarifying. I understood now that my professional success was something I would have to achieve despite my husband's attitudes rather than with his encouragement, and I was prepared to do exactly that. I accepted Jessica's offer and gave my 2 weeks' notice to the volunteer positions that had helped me rebuild my confidence and demonstrate my capabilities. As I prepared to start my new job, I felt a mixture of excitement and determination that I hadn't experienced in years. I was ready to prove, not just to Mark, but to myself and everyone else who had doubted me, that Lisa Chen was far from finished with her professional life. The morning I started work at Jessica's company, I looked at myself in the mirror and saw someone I had almost forgotten existed. I saw a capable, ambitious, professional woman who had temporarily set aside her career goals but had never lost the skills and drive that had made her successful in the first place. Mark might not believe in me, but I was about to remind the business world and myself exactly what I was capable of accomplishing. Working at Safe Haven, Jessica's domestic violence resource app, was like stepping into a parallel universe where my experience and strategic thinking were not just valued, but essential. The office was a converted warehouse space in Denver's Rhino district, filled with young developers, social workers, and advocates who brought an intensity and purpose to their work that I hadn't encountered in traditional corporate environments. Jessica had assembled a team of people who genuinely believed they were saving lives through technology, and that sense of mission infused every project meeting and strategy session. My first week involved immersing myself in user research data that painted a sobering picture of the challenges facing women seeking safe housing. The statistics Jessica shared with me were staggering. In Denver alone, domestic violence shelters turned away over 60% of women seeking help because they were at capacity, and many women didn't even know what resources were available to them. The app was designed to provide real-time information about available shelter beds, legal aid services, counseling resources, and safety planning tools. But reaching the women who needed these services required marketing strategies that were both sophisticated and sensitive. The challenge was unlike anything I had worked on in my previous career. Traditional marketing focused on creating desire for products people didn't know they wanted, but this required reaching women who desperately needed help, but might be too afraid or isolated to actively seek it. The target audience included women who were being monitored by abusive partners, who had limited access to technology, who might be using public computers at libraries, and who needed information delivered in ways that wouldn't put them in additional danger. Jessica had tried several marketing approaches before hiring me, mostly based on advice from well-meaning board members who had experience in other industries. They had created Facebook ads that looked like typical social media marketing, developed a website that resembled other nonprofit organizations, and launched an awareness campaign that relied heavily on statistics and emotional appeals. These efforts had generated some app downloads, but the user engagement rates were disappointingly low, and Jessica was struggling to demonstrate the kind of growth that would attract the additional funding she needed to expand the app's capabilities. I spent my first month conducting in-depth interviews with women who had used the app, social workers who referred clients to various resources, and shelter directors who understood the practical challenges their clients faced when trying to access help. What I discovered was that the existing marketing approach was fundamentally misaligned with how women in crisis actually sought information and made decisions about their safety. The traditional marketing materials looked too polished, too official, too much like the kind of resources that abusive partners might monitor or question. Women in dangerous situations needed information that appeared innocuous, that could be accessed quickly and privately, and that didn't require them to identify themselves as domestic violence victims. They were more likely to search for general information about housing assistance or legal aid than to specifically look for domestic violence resources, and they needed content that spoke to their situations indirectly rather than explicitly. Based on this research, I developed a completely new marketing strategy that focused on meeting women where they actually were, rather than where we wished they would go for help. Instead of creating obvious domestic violence awareness campaigns, I developed content marketing that addressed broader topics like financial independence, housing assistance, legal rights, and personal safety. This content was designed to provide valuable information to any woman who might need it, while also including subtle indicators that additional resources were available for those facing more serious dangers. I redesigned the app's website to look less like a social service organization and more like a general resource for women navigating difficult life transitions. I created blog posts about topics like understanding lease agreements, managing finances during separation, and knowing your legal rights in Colorado, all of which contained embedded links to more specific domestic violence resources for women who needed them. I developed a social media strategy that focused on sharing empowering content about women's independence and strength, rather than focusing explicitly on abuse and victimization. The results of this new approach were immediately apparent. App downloads increased by 40% within the first 6 weeks, but more importantly, user engagement rates tripled. Women were spending more time on the app, accessing multiple resources, and returning to use additional features. The feedback Jessica received through user surveys indicated that women felt safer using an app that didn't immediately identify them as domestic violence victims, and they appreciated being able to access help in a way that felt private and non-threatening. The success of my marketing strategy attracted attention from other organizations working in the domestic violence space. Within 3 months of starting at Safe Haven, I was invited to speak at a conference for nonprofit technology leaders about innovative approaches to reaching vulnerable populations. The presentation I gave about indirect marketing strategies for sensitive social services was well received, and several other organizations approached me about consulting on their own marketing challenges. Jessica was thrilled with these developments, not just because the improved marketing was helping Safe Haven grow, but because the recognition was making it easier for her to raise additional funding. Investors and grant-making foundations were more interested in supporting an organization that was demonstrating innovative approaches and measurable impact, and my marketing expertise was becoming a significant competitive advantage for the company. The personal satisfaction I derived from this work was unlike anything I had experienced in my previous career. While my earlier marketing campaigns had been successful in terms of driving sales and increasing brand awareness, this work felt fundamentally different because I could see the direct impact it was having on women's lives. Jessica regularly shared stories about women who had found safety through resources they discovered on the app, and knowing that my marketing strategies were helping connect women to life-saving services gave my work a meaning and urgency that I had never felt before. Mark's reaction to my professional success was a masterclass in passive-aggressive sabotage disguised as concern. He never directly criticized my work or suggested that I should quit my job, but he found countless small ways to undermine my confidence and create obstacles to my success. He would schedule social commitments on evenings when I had important project deadlines, then act surprised when I explained that I couldn't attend because of work responsibilities. He would make comments about how late I was staying at the office, implying that I was neglecting our home and our relationship in favor of career ambitions that were probably temporary anyway. When I received the invitation to speak at the nonprofit, technology conference. Mark's response was particularly revealing. Instead of congratulating me on this professional recognition, he focused on the logistics of my travel, expressing concern about how I would manage my work responsibilities while being away from the office for 2 days. He suggested that maybe I was taking on too much too quickly, and that I should be careful not to overcommit myself before I was fully established in my new role. The subtext of Mark's concerns was always the same. I was getting ahead of myself, taking risks that weren't necessary, and potentially setting myself up for embarrassment or failure. He never said explicitly that he thought I would fail, but he consistently positioned himself as the voice of caution and realism, protecting me from my own overconfidence and naivety about the business world. What Mark didn't understand, or chose not to acknowledge, was that my work at Safe Haven was giving me something I had been missing for 15 years, proof of my own capabilities and evidence that my professional skills were not only intact, but were actually stronger than they had been before I took time away from the workforce. The strategic thinking skills I had developed through managing a household and raising children had enhanced my ability to understand complex problems and develop comprehensive solutions. The emotional intelligence I had gained through years of navigating family dynamics and community relationships had made me more effective at understanding user needs and creating marketing messages that resonated with real people facing difficult situations. 6 months into my role at Safe Haven, Jessica offered me a promotion to head of marketing and communications, with a significant salary increase and additional equity in the company. This promotion reflected not just my success with the app's marketing strategy, but also my growing role in the company's overall strategic planning and business development efforts. Jessica had come to rely on my input for decisions that went far beyond marketing, and she wanted to formalize my position as a key member of her leadership team. The promotion also came with new responsibilities that excited me more than any job opportunity I had ever been offered. I would be leading a team of 3 marketing professionals, developing partnerships with other organizations in the domestic violence space, and representing Safe Haven at industry conferences and funding meetings. These were exactly the kinds of leadership challenges I had always wanted to tackle, and I was thrilled to be getting this opportunity at a company whose mission I genuinely believed in. When I told Mark about the promotion, his reaction was a mixture of surprise, skepticism, and something that looked suspiciously like resentment. He asked detailed questions about my new salary and equity stake, clearly calculating how my compensation compared to his own earnings at DataCore Solutions. He expressed concern about the additional responsibilities I would be taking on, suggesting that I might be biting off more than I could chew and risking burnout or failure by accepting too much responsibility too quickly. But what bothered Mark most seemed to be the recognition I was receiving from outside the company. When I mentioned that I had been invited to join the board of directors for a coalition of nonprofit organizations working on women's safety issues, his response was to suggest that I was spreading myself too thin and might not be able to fulfill all these commitments effectively. When local media outlets began reaching out to interview me about innovative marketing strategies for social service organizations, Mark commented that I should be careful not to let media attention go to my head. The tension in our marriage was becoming impossible to ignore. While I was experiencing the most professionally fulfilling period of my adult life, Mark was becoming increasingly critical and unsupportive. Our dinner conversations, which had once been opportunities to share the highlights and challenges of our respective days, became exercises in diplomatic avoidance as I learned to downplay my successes to avoid triggering his negative reactions. The breaking point came when Safe Haven received a major grant from a national foundation that specifically cited the company's innovative marketing approach as one of the reasons for their funding decision. The grant was for $2 million over 3 years, and it would allow Jessica to expand the app to serve women in 5 additional states. The Foundation's program officer mentioned in their award announcement that Safe Haven's ability to reach vulnerable populations through sophisticated but sensitive marketing strategies had distinguished their application from dozens of other worthy proposals. This recognition was the culmination of everything I had worked toward since joining Safe Haven, and it represented validation of my professional capabilities at the highest level. A national foundation with expertise in domestic violence prevention had specifically identified my marketing work as innovative and effective, and their funding would allow the app to help thousands of additional women access life-saving resources. When I shared this news with Mark, expecting at least some acknowledgement of this professional achievement, his response was to focus on how the additional grant funding might affect the stability of my job. He suggested that nonprofit organizations were notoriously unstable, and that increased visibility might actually put more pressure on Safe Haven to deliver results that could be difficult to achieve. He warned me not to get too comfortable in a role that might disappear if the organization couldn't meet the foundation's expectations for how the grant money would be used. That evening, as I sat in our living room trying to process Mark's reaction to what should have been a celebration-worthy achievement, I realized that our marriage had reached a crisis point that went far beyond typical relationship challenges. Mark wasn't just unsupportive of my career success. He was actively invested in undermining my confidence and diminishing my achievements. His identity was so threatened by my professional accomplishments that he couldn't bring himself to celebrate my successes even when they had no direct impact on his own career or our family's financial security. I began to understand that Mark's resistance to my career wasn't really about practical concerns or realistic caution. It was about power and control within our marriage, and about his inability to adjust his self-concept to accommodate a wife who was professionally successful and publicly recognized for her expertise. For 25 years, our relationship had been built on the assumption that he was the accomplished spouse and I was the supportive partner, and my career success was forcing both of us to confront how limiting and ultimately damaging that dynamic had been. The next morning, I made a decision that would fundamentally change the trajectory of both my career and my marriage. I was going to stop allowing Mark's insecurities and negativity to diminish my professional achievements or influence my career decisions. I had proven to myself and to the broader professional community that I was capable of exceptional work, and I was going to build on that success regardless of whether my husband could accept and support my accomplishments. I called Jessica and asked if we could have a strategic planning meeting about Safe Haven's long-term growth goals. I had been thinking about ways the company could expand its impact beyond the app, potentially developing consulting services for other organizations, or creating training programs for marketing professionals who wanted to work in the social services sector. These ideas represented opportunities for both professional growth and increased income, and I was ready to explore them seriously. Jessica was enthusiastic about my expansion ideas and suggested that we bring in a business consultant to help us develop a comprehensive plan for growing Safe Haven into a multi-service organization. She also mentioned that she had been contacted by several other startup founders who were interested in hiring me as a consultant for their own marketing challenges. And she encouraged me to consider taking on freelance projects that could build my reputation and create additional income streams. As I left that meeting, I felt a sense of excitement and possibility that I hadn't experienced since my early career days in Chicago. I was building something significant, creating work that mattered, and developing a professional reputation that was based on demonstrated results rather than past accomplishments or personal connections. Mark might not be able to celebrate my success, but I was learning to celebrate it myself and to build relationships with people who valued and supported my professional goals. The woman who had been dismissed as too old and out of touch just 18 months earlier was now leading a team, advising other organizations, and being recognized as an expert in her field. I was ready to see how much further I could take this momentum, and I was no longer willing to let anyone, including my husband, convince me to settle for less than I was capable of achieving. The opportunity that would change everything arrived. On a Tuesday morning in March, delivered through a LinkedIn message that I almost dismissed as spam. The sender was Rebecca Martinez, Director of Human Resources at DataCore Solutions, Mark's company. She had seen my speaking engagement at the nonprofit technology conference and was reaching out about a newly created position that might align with my expertise. DataCore was looking to hire their first director of strategic marketing, someone who could lead their efforts to diversify beyond their traditional client base and develop new revenue streams. Reading that message felt surreal, almost like the universe was presenting me with the ultimate test of how far I had come since those early days of rejection and self-doubt. DataCore Solutions was the company where Mark had built his entire career, where he was respected and comfortable, where he had colleagues who knew me only as his supportive wife. The idea of working there, potentially in a leadership role that would put me on equal footing with the people who had once laughed at my professional ambitions, was both terrifying and exhilarating. I scheduled a preliminary phone conversation with Rebecca, curious to learn more about the position, but not yet committed to pursuing it seriously. During our call, she explained that DataCore's leadership team had recognized they were too dependent on their traditional data integration services and needed to expand into more comprehensive business consulting. They wanted someone who could develop marketing strategies for reaching new types of clients, particularly in the nonprofit and social impact sectors where they had no existing relationships. The irony was perfect. DataCore needed exactly the expertise I had developed at Safe Haven, the understanding of how to market complex services to organizations that operated differently from traditional corporate clients. Rebecca mentioned that they had been impressed by articles I had written about marketing to mission-driven organizations, and they were specifically looking for someone who could bridge the gap between their technical capabilities and the unique needs of purpose-driven clients. When Rebecca asked if I would be interested in a formal interview, I found myself saying yes before I had fully processed the implications of what I was considering. The salary range she mentioned was significantly higher than what I was earning at Safe Haven, and the position would come with equity participation and a comprehensive benefits package. More importantly, it would be an opportunity to prove my capabilities in a traditional corporate environment, working with the kinds of clients and projects that Mark had always suggested were beyond my reach. I didn't mention the interview opportunity to Mark immediately. I needed time to think through the potential consequences of this decision, both for my marriage and for my career trajectory. Working at the same company as my husband would create complex dynamics that I wasn't sure either of us was prepared to navigate, especially given the tension that had been building around my professional success. But as I considered the opportunity more seriously, I realized that this position represented something more significant than just another job change. It was a chance to demonstrate, in the most direct way possible, that the woman Mark had dismissed as unrealistic and out of touch was not only capable of succeeding in his professional world, but was qualified for leadership responsibilities that exceeded his current role. The interview process at DataCore was unlike anything I had experienced in my previous job searches. Instead of being asked to prove that I could overcome my employment gap or justify my relevance in a changed business landscape, I was treated as an established professional whose expertise was specifically needed to solve problems the company was facing. The hiring team had done their research on my work at Safe Haven and the recognition I had received in the nonprofit marketing space, and they were interviewing me because they believed my experience would translate into valuable capabilities for their expansion goals. The interview panel included DataCore's CEO, the head of business development, and 2 senior client managers who would be working closely with whoever filled this position. They asked sophisticated questions about my strategic approach to marketing, complex services, my experience managing client relationships in sensitive situations, and my vision for how DataCore could successfully enter new market segments. These were exactly the kinds of conversations I had been hoping to have during my earlier job searches, discussions that treated me as a peer rather than a risky hire who needed to prove her basic competence. During the interview, I presented a comprehensive analysis of DataCore's current market position and outlined specific strategies for expanding their client base into the nonprofit and social impact sectors. I explained how their technical expertise in data integration and systems optimization could be valuable to organizations that were often underserved by traditional consulting firms, and I detailed marketing approaches that could help them build relationships with foundation leaders, nonprofit executives, and social entrepreneurs who controlled significant consulting budgets. The response from the interview panel was immediately positive. They asked detailed follow-up questions about implementation timelines, budget requirements, and potential revenue projections, treating my proposals as serious strategic recommendations rather than speculative ideas. By the end of the 2-hour interview, I could sense that they were already envisioning me in the role and thinking about how quickly they could move forward with an offer. 3 days later, Rebecca called with a formal job offer that exceeded my highest expectations. The salary was 30% higher than what Mark was earning in his senior analyst role, and the equity package could potentially be worth significant money if DataCore continued growing at their current pace. The position would come with a corner office, administrative support, and a budget for building a marketing team that could support the company's expansion goals. Most significantly, the role would report directly to the CEO and would involve regular presentations to the board of directors about marketing strategy and business development progress. This wasn't just a senior position. It was a true leadership role that would give me influence over the company's overall strategic direction and visibility throughout the organization. When I accepted the offer, Rebecca mentioned that she was excited to have someone with my expertise joining the team, and that several people in the company were looking forward to working with me. She asked if I had any concerns about the transition, or if there were any special considerations she should be aware of as they prepared for my arrival. I took a deep breath and explained that my husband Mark Chen was currently employed as a senior analyst in the data integration department, and that this relationship might create some unique dynamics that we should discuss. Rebecca's reaction was a mixture of surprise and amusement. She mentioned that she knew Mark professionally and thought it was wonderful that DataCore would be adding another member of the Chen family to their team. She assured me that the company had policies in place for managing situations where family members were employed in the same organization, and that my husband's role would be completely separate from my responsibilities and reporting structure. What Rebecca didn't say, but what I could hear in her tone, was that Mark's position as a senior analyst was several levels below my new role as Director of Strategic Marketing. While we wouldn't have a direct reporting relationship, I would be considered part of the senior leadership team while he remained in a mid-level technical role. The power dynamics that had defined our marriage for 25 years were about to be completely reversed, at least in our professional lives. Telling Mark about my new job was one of the most difficult conversations of our marriage. I waited until we were having dinner at home, in the familiar setting of our kitchen where we had shared thousands of meals and countless discussions about our respective careers. I started by mentioning that I had been approached about a new opportunity and that I had decided to accept a position that would represent a significant step forward in my career. Mark's initial reaction was politely supportive, the kind of response he had learned to give when I shared professional news that he couldn't openly criticize without seeming petty or unreasonable. He asked about the company and the role, and I could see him mentally calculating whether this new position would be more prestigious or better compensated than his own job. When I explained that the position was at DataCore Solutions, Mark's expression went through several rapid changes. First confusion, as he tried to process what I was telling him, then disbelief, as he realized I was serious about working at his company, and finally something that looked like panic, as he began to understand the implications of this development. His first questions were practical and defensive. How had I learned about the position? Had I mentioned that I was married to someone who already worked there? Did the hiring team know about our relationship? And how might that affect both of our positions at the company? But underneath these surface concerns, I could see him struggling with the deeper reality of what my hire represented. When I explained that I would be serving as Director of Strategic Marketing, reporting directly to the CEO and leading the company's expansion into new market segments, Mark went completely silent. He sat there staring at his plate, processing the information I had just shared, and I could almost see him working through the hierarchy and power structures that would now define our professional relationship. After several minutes of silence, Mark asked about my salary and benefits package. When I told him the compensation details, his face went pale. He was realizing that his wife, the woman he had dismissed as too old and out of touch for corporate employment, was about to become one of the highest-paid employees at his company, earning significantly more than he did despite having been out of the workforce for 15 years. The conversation that followed was unlike anything we had ever experienced in our marriage. Mark expressed concerns about how our working relationship would affect our personal relationship, worried about potential conflicts of interest, and questioned whether I had fully considered the challenges of working in the same organization as my spouse. But beneath all of these practical concerns, I could hear his real fear, that I would overshadow him professionally and that his colleagues would see him as less accomplished than his wife. I tried to reassure Mark that I had no intention of interfering with his work or his relationships at DataCore, and that I was committed to maintaining appropriate boundaries between our professional and personal lives. I explained that my role would be focused on business development and marketing strategy, areas that rarely intersected with his technical responsibilities, and that we would probably have limited day-to-day interaction at the office. But Mark's concerns went deeper than logistics and professional boundaries. He was grappling with a fundamental shift in how he understood himself and our marriage. For our entire relationship, he had been the successful spouse, the one with the impressive career and the stories about professional challenges and achievements. The possibility that I might become more professionally successful than he was challenged the identity he had built around being the accomplished partner in our marriage. My first day at DataCore Solutions was unlike any workplace experience I had ever had. Rebecca met me in the lobby and gave me a comprehensive tour of the offices, introducing me to department heads and key employees who would be working with me on various projects. Everyone I met was professional and welcoming, treating me with the respect accorded to a new senior leader, rather than as someone's spouse who had been hired as a favor or diversity initiative. My corner office was located on the executive floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over downtown Denver, and furnished with the kind of high-quality furniture and technology that signaled my position in the company hierarchy. I had administrative support, access to all executive meetings and planning sessions, and a budget for hiring additional marketing staff as the department expanded. Mark's reaction to seeing me in this environment was complex and painful to watch. When he stopped by my office on my first afternoon to see how I was settling in, I could see him taking in the details of my workspace, the view, the expensive furniture, and comparing it to his own cubicle in the data integration department. He made polite conversation about how nice everything looked and mentioned that he was glad I was happy with the new position, but I could see the strain in his expression. The real test came during my first all-hands company meeting, where I was introduced to the entire staff as the new director of strategic marketing. The CEO spent several minutes describing my background and expertise, mentioning my success at Safe Haven and the innovative marketing strategies I had developed for reaching underserved populations. He explained that my hiring represented DataCore's commitment to expanding beyond their traditional client base and developing new revenue streams that would ensure the company's continued growth. As I stood in front of the assembled employees, delivering a brief presentation about my vision for DataCore's marketing strategy, I could see Mark sitting in the audience. His expression was carefully neutral, but I knew him well enough to recognize the emotions he was struggling to control. His colleagues were listening respectfully to his wife's professional presentation, taking notes on her strategic recommendations, and treating her as an expert whose insights would guide the company's future direction. After the meeting, several of Mark's coworkers approached me to express their excitement about working with someone who had such impressive experience in marketing to mission-driven organizations. They mentioned that they had heard about my work at Safe Haven and were curious about how those strategies might be adapted for DataCore's expansion goals. These conversations were professional and collegial, but I could see Mark watching from across the room, observing his colleagues interact with his wife as a peer and superior rather than as his supportive spouse. The first major project that demonstrated the complete reversal of our professional relationship came 6 weeks after I started at DataCore. The company had an opportunity to bid on a large consulting contract with a consortium of environmental nonprofits who needed help integrating their data systems across multiple organizations. This was exactly the kind of project that required both technical expertise and an understanding of how nonprofit organizations operated, making it perfect for showcasing DataCore's expanded capabilities. The project team included Mark as the lead technical analyst, responsible for designing the data integration systems, and me as the marketing and client relationship lead, responsible for understanding the client's needs and ensuring that our solutions aligned with their organizational goals. For the first time in our 25-year marriage, we were working together as professional colleagues, with me in the senior role responsible for overall project success and client satisfaction. The dynamic was awkward and fascinating to navigate. In meetings with the nonprofit clients, I took the lead in discussing their needs and explaining how DataCore's services could address their challenges, while Mark provided technical expertise and implementation details. The clients naturally looked to me as the primary point of contact and decision-maker, and Mark had to adjust to playing a supporting role in discussions where he was usually the lead expert. What made the situation more complex was that my understanding of nonprofit operations and marketing needs was clearly superior to Mark's technical knowledge in this context. The clients were impressed by my ability to translate their organizational challenges into technical requirements, and they frequently complimented DataCore on having someone who really understood their sector and could communicate effectively about their needs. The project was ultimately successful, resulting in a contract worth over $2 million and establishing DataCore as a credible consulting partner for large nonprofit organizations. The clients were so satisfied with our work that they recommended us to other organizations in their network, leading to additional contracts that validated the company's expansion strategy and my role in leading it. During the project celebration dinner, the CEO publicly thanked both Mark and me for our contributions to this success. But it was clear that my role in winning and managing the client relationship was seen as the more significant contribution. Mark received recognition for his technical expertise, but I was credited with the strategic thinking and client management skills that had made the project possible. That evening, as we drove home from the celebration dinner, Mark and I had the most honest conversation about our marriage and our professional relationship that we had ever experienced. He admitted that he had been wrong about my capabilities and my potential for professional success, and he acknowledged that his resistance to my career goals had been driven by insecurity and fear rather than practical concerns or realistic assessment of the job market. Mark explained that he had built his identity around being the accomplished spouse in our marriage, and that my success threatened his understanding of himself and his role in our relationship. He had convinced himself that his dismissive attitude toward my career aspirations was protective and realistic, when it was actually selfish and limiting. He apologized for undermining my confidence and for failing to support my professional goals when I needed his encouragement most. But Mark also expressed concerns about how our reversed professional dynamic would affect our marriage going forward. He worried that he would feel diminished or resentful if I continued to advance faster than he did, and he questioned whether he could handle being married to someone who was more professionally successful than he was. These were honest concerns that required serious discussion and ongoing work to resolve. I told Mark that I appreciated his honesty and his apology, but that I also needed him to understand that my professional success was not negotiable or dependent on his comfort level. I had proven to myself and to others that I was capable of exceptional work, and I was going to continue building on that success regardless of how it affected the power dynamics in our marriage. If he wanted our relationship to survive and thrive, he would need to find ways to support and celebrate my achievements rather than feeling threatened by them. 6 months after starting at DataCore, I was promoted to Vice President of Business Development, with expanded responsibilities for all of the company's marketing and client relationship activities. My team had grown to include 5 marketing professionals and 2 business development specialists, and we were generating over 30% of the company's new revenue through the relationships and strategies we had developed. Mark, meanwhile, had received a modest promotion to senior technical analyst, with a salary increase that was dwarfed by my compensation growth. While he was still respected for his technical expertise, it was clear that his career trajectory was much more limited than mine, and that the gap between our professional accomplishments was likely to continue widening. The most satisfying moment of this entire journey came during DataCore's annual awards ceremony, where I received the company's highest honor for business development excellence. As I stood on the stage accepting the award from the CEO, I looked out at the audience and saw Mark applauding along with everyone else, his expression showing pride rather than resentment for the first time since I had started working at the company. In my acceptance speech, I talked about the importance of believing in your own capabilities even when others doubt them, and about the value of persistence in pursuing goals that matter to you. I mentioned that success often requires taking risks and accepting challenges that seem impossible at first, but that the reward for that courage is the opportunity to discover what you're truly capable of achieving. After the ceremony, Mark approached me with genuine congratulation and told me that he was proud of what I had accomplished and grateful that I had persisted despite his lack of support. He said that watching me succeed had forced him to confront his own limitations and assumptions, and that he was working on becoming the kind of partner who could celebrate my achievements without feeling diminished by them. Today, I serve as DataCore's Senior Vice President of Strategic Growth, leading a division that generates over half of the company's revenue and has expanded our services into markets that didn't exist when I first walked through the doors as Director of Strategic Marketing. Mark continues to work in the technical division, where he has found fulfillment in developing expertise that complements rather than competes with my strategic work. Our marriage has been transformed by this experience, evolving from a traditional dynamic where one spouse was professionally dominant to a partnership where we both contribute our strengths and support each other's success. Mark has learned to take pride in my achievements and to find his own satisfaction in work that he values, rather than trying to maintain artificial hierarchy based on outdated assumptions about gender roles and career trajectories. The woman, who was once told she was too old for corporate life, now leads strategy meetings with Fortune 500 CEOs, speaks at national conferences about business development innovation, and mentors other women who are navigating career transitions after extended periods away from the workforce. I've learned that age and experience are advantages rather than limitations, and that the skills developed through managing a family and household are directly transferable to managing complex business challenges. Most importantly, I've discovered that success isn't just about proving others wrong. It's about proving to yourself that you're capable of more than you ever imagined possible. The husband who once doubted my capabilities now introduces me at professional events as his accomplished wife, and the colleagues who might have once dismissed me as someone's spouse now seek my advice on their most challenging business problems. The transformation has been complete, the reversal absolute, and the satisfaction immeasurable. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply becoming so successful that everyone who doubted you has no choice but to acknowledge your excellence. 2 years after accepting the position at DataCore Solutions, I found myself sitting in the boardroom of one of Denver's most prestigious law firms, negotiating the terms of what would become the largest consulting contract in DataCore's 30-year history. The client was a coalition of international humanitarian organizations seeking to modernize their data management systems across 4 continents, and they had specifically requested that I lead the project based on my reputation for understanding complex organizational needs and translating them into practical technical solutions. The meeting included executives from organizations I had only dreamed of working with during my early career, people whose names appeared regularly in business journals and whose decisions affected millions of lives around the world. They treated me not as someone who had recently returned to work after a long absence, but as an established expert whose insights were essential to their success. The conversation moved seamlessly between strategic planning, budget allocation, and implementation timelines, with everyone in the room looking to me for guidance on how to structure a project of unprecedented scope and complexity. As I presented, DataCore's proposed approach to integrating data systems across organizations that operated in vastly different regulatory and cultural environments, I felt a profound sense of arrival that went beyond professional achievement. This wasn't just about proving that I could succeed in the corporate world. It was about demonstrating that my particular combination of experience, strategic thinking, and interpersonal skills could create value that no one else in the industry was capable of delivering. The contract we secured that day was worth $12 million over 3 years, representing nearly 20% of DataCore's total revenue and establishing the company as a leader in international humanitarian consulting. More significantly for my own career trajectory, the project positioned me as one of the most sought-after strategic consultants in the nonprofit technology sector, with organizations around the world reaching out to request my expertise on their most challenging modernization efforts. The success of this project led to my appointment as DataCore's first Chief Strategy Officer, a newly created position that recognized my role in transforming the company from a regional data integration firm into a global consulting powerhouse. The promotion came with a compensation package that placed me among the highest-paid executives in Denver's technology sector, along with equity stakes that would prove incredibly valuable as DataCore continued expanding into new markets and service areas. Mark's reaction to my latest promotion was a study in contrast compared to his responses during the early stages of my career resurgence. Instead of the barely concealed resentment and passive-aggressive undermining that had characterized his behavior when I first started working at Safe Haven, he now expressed genuine pride in my achievements and frequently mentioned my success to friends and colleagues. The transformation in his attitude hadn't happened overnight, and it had required ongoing conversations and sometimes difficult negotiations about how we would navigate the changed dynamics in our marriage. The turning point had come during a weekend retreat we took to Aspen 6 months after I started at DataCore, when Mark finally articulated the fears and insecurities that had driven his earlier resistance to my career goals. He explained that he had built his entire adult identity around being the successful spouse in our marriage, the one who brought home impressive paychecks and had stories about important business decisions and challenging client relationships. The possibility that I might become more professionally accomplished than he was threatened not just his ego, but his fundamental understanding of who he was and what role he played in our family. During that same conversation, I shared my own perspective on how his lack of support had affected me during the most vulnerable stages of my career transition. I explained that his dismissive comments and subtle sabotage had made an already challenging process significantly more difficult, and that I had been forced to rebuild my professional confidence without the encouragement and partnership that I should have been able to expect from my husband. I told him that while I appreciated his eventual recognition of my capabilities, the damage to our relationship would take time and effort to repair. What emerged from those discussions was a new framework for our marriage, one that acknowledged both of our professional ambitions and created space for us to support each other's success without feeling threatened or diminished. Mark began working with a career counselor to explore opportunities for advancement within DataCore's technical division, while I committed to including him in discussions about my career decisions and being mindful of how my success might affect our relationship dynamics. The most unexpected benefit of this new approach to our marriage was how it improved Mark's own professional performance and satisfaction. Instead of feeling threatened by my achievements, he began leveraging our combined expertise to position himself as a valuable bridge between DataCore's technical and strategic divisions. His deep understanding of the company's capabilities, combined with insights he gained from my client interactions, made him an increasingly valuable resource for complex projects that required both technical excellence and strategic thinking. Mark's career advancement accelerated significantly once he stopped viewing my success as a threat and started seeing it as an opportunity to learn and grow. He received a promotion to principal technical architect, with responsibilities that included working directly with clients to understand their technical needs and translate them into implementable solutions. While his role remained primarily technical rather than strategic, he had found ways to increase his impact and job satisfaction that didn't require competing with me or feeling diminished by my achievements. The broader impact of my career transformation extended far beyond our marriage and my individual professional success. As word spread about my work at DataCore and the results we were achieving for clients in the nonprofit and social impact sectors, I began receiving invitations to speak at conferences, contribute to industry publications, and serve on boards of organizations that were working to bridge the gap between technology and social good. One of the most meaningful recognition opportunities came when I was invited to deliver the keynote address at a national conference for women returning to work after extended career breaks. The organization had heard about my journey from stay-at-home mother to C-suite executive and wanted me to share insights about navigating career transitions and overcoming the challenges faced by women who were re-entering the workforce after focusing on family responsibilities. Preparing for that speech required me to reflect deeply on the path I had traveled over the previous 3 years, from the initial rejection emails that had made me question my own capabilities to the international consulting contracts that had established me as a leader in my field. I realized that my story wasn't just about personal resilience or professional achievement. It was about challenging assumptions that society makes about women's career trajectories and the value of experience that doesn't fit traditional corporate models. In my keynote address, I talked about the unique strengths that women bring to leadership roles after spending years managing households and raising children. I explained how the project management skills required to coordinate family schedules translate directly into business planning capabilities, how the negotiation skills developed through parenting disagreements apply to client relationship management, and how the crisis management experience gained through handling family emergencies creates invaluable expertise for navigating business challenges. The response to that speech was overwhelming, with hundreds of women reaching out to share their own stories of career transitions and ask for advice about overcoming obstacles they were facing. Many of them described experiences similar to mine, including husbands or partners who were unsupportive of their professional ambitions and employers who questioned their relevance after extended periods away from the workforce. These conversations led me to develop a formal mentoring program through DataCore, designed to help women navigate career transitions and build the confidence necessary to pursue leadership opportunities. The program included workshops on updating technical skills, networking strategies for building professional relationships, and techniques for articulating the value of non-traditional career experiences. We also created partnerships with local companies that were committed to hiring women returning to work, providing concrete opportunities for program participants to apply what they had learned. The success of this mentoring program attracted attention from national organizations focused on women's career development, leading to invitations to expand the program to other cities and consult with corporations about creating more inclusive hiring practices. This work became increasingly important to me, not just because it was personally fulfilling, but because it represented an opportunity to create systemic change that would benefit other women facing challenges similar to those I had encountered. One of the most gratifying aspects of this mentoring work was seeing women who had initially doubted their own capabilities achieve professional success that exceeded their original goals. Sarah Mitchell, a former teacher who had been out of the workforce for 8 years, leveraged the skills she gained through our program to become a project manager at a major consulting firm. Maria Rodriguez, who had spent 12 years as a full-time caregiver for her elderly parents, used our networking strategies to secure a position as a nonprofit development director, where she successfully led a capital campaign that raised over $2 million. These success stories validated my belief that women who had taken career breaks for family reasons weren't damaged goods who needed to settle for lesser opportunities, but experienced professionals who brought unique perspectives. and valuable skills to organizations smart enough to recognize their potential. The challenge wasn't helping these women develop capabilities they lacked. It was helping them articulate and market the capabilities they already possessed. As my reputation grew within Denver's business community and beyond, I began receiving offers for even more significant opportunities. A headhunting firm approached me about serving as CEO for a struggling nonprofit technology company, and several venture capital firms expressed interest in funding startups I might want to launch. These opportunities were flattering and potentially lucrative, but they also required me to think carefully about what I wanted the next phase of my career to look like. The decision-making process was complicated by the fact that Mark and I had finally achieved a comfortable balance in our professional and personal lives. DataCore had become a place where we could both thrive without competing directly, and our marriage had evolved into a genuine partnership where we supported each other's success rather than feeling threatened by it. Taking on a CEO role or launching a startup would require significant changes to this carefully constructed equilibrium, and I wasn't sure either of us was ready for another major transition. After extensive discussions with Mark, my mentor Jessica from Safe Haven, and several trusted advisors, I decided to stay at DataCore, but negotiate an expansion of my role that would allow me to pursue the kinds of challenges I found most energizing. I proposed creating a new division focused on social impact consulting, which would allow DataCore to formalize and expand the work we had been doing with nonprofit and humanitarian organizations, while also creating opportunities for me to take on increasingly complex and meaningful projects. The DataCore board approved my proposal enthusiastically, recognizing that the social impact division represented both a growth opportunity and a way to differentiate the company in an increasingly competitive market. I was given significant autonomy to build the division according to my vision, with a substantial budget for hiring staff and developing new service offerings that would position DataCore as the premier consulting firm for organizations working to create positive social change. Building this division from the ground up was the most professionally satisfying work I had ever undertaken. I was able to combine everything I had learned about strategic planning, client relationship management, and team leadership with my passion for supporting organizations that were working to solve society's most pressing problems. The projects we took on ranged from helping international development organizations modernize their program evaluation systems to supporting social entrepreneurs who were scaling innovative solutions to poverty and inequality. One of the most impactful projects involved working with a coalition of organizations focused on criminal justice reform to develop a comprehensive data platform that could track the effectiveness of different intervention programs across multiple states. The work required not only technical expertise in data integration and analysis, but also deep understanding of the political and social dynamics that influenced how criminal justice policies were developed and implemented. The success of this project led to additional contracts with government agencies and advocacy organizations, establishing DataCore's Social Impact Division as a trusted partner for groups working on complex policy challenges. More importantly for me personally, it demonstrated that I could create meaningful change while also building a profitable business, combining financial success with social impact in ways that benefited everyone involved. As I reflected on the IC journey that had brought me to this point, I realized that the transformation had been about much more than career advancement or financial success. It had been about reclaiming my identity as a capable, ambitious, strategic thinker who had temporarily set aside professional goals, but had never lost the fundamental capabilities that made me effective in leadership roles. The woman who had been dismissed as too old and out of touch had become someone whose expertise was sought by organizations around the world, whose strategic insights were valued by executive teams and board members, and whose leadership had transformed not just her own career trajectory, but the lives of countless other women who had been told they were past their prime for professional achievement. Mark, meanwhile, had evolved from someone who felt threatened by his wife's ambitions into a genuine partner who took pride in my success and found fulfillment in his own expanding role at DataCore. Our marriage had been strengthened rather than weakened by the challenges we had navigated. And we had created a model for how couples could support each other's professional growth without sacrificing their personal relationship. The most profound realization was that success hadn't required choosing between family and career, or proving that I was better than anyone else, or seeking revenge against those who had doubted me. It had simply required believing in my own capabilities and persisting through obstacles until I found opportunities that allowed me to demonstrate what I was capable of achieving. Today, as I prepare for another international consulting assignment and review applications from women seeking to join our mentoring program, I'm struck by how different my life is from what I could have imagined when I first started questioning whether I had anything valuable to contribute to the professional world. The transformation has been complete, but more importantly, it has been sustainable and meaningful in ways that extend far beyond my individual success. The legacy I hope to leave isn't just about one woman who overcame obstacles to achieve professional recognition, but about changing assumptions and creating opportunities for other women who have been told they're too old, too inexperienced, or too far removed from the workforce to achieve their professional goals. Sometimes the most powerful form of success isn't just reaching your own potential, but helping others recognize and reach theirs as well. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.